Whoop, 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 whoop. Nam paints! Hey Smashlings! So, this video is just going to be a quick run through of how I painted my Rebel R5 unit for my Star Wars Legion base army. So, we pulled it out of the bag. Setup is pretty easy for these models. Just some dots of super glue into the arms. I struggled a little bit to get the arms to sit quite correctly, with especially tiny bits on these. They have the molded parts so that you can kind of tell how they're supposed to go together, but I found that with the small parts it's pretty hard to tell them apart. So if you're working with like two arms for the same model, they may have very slightly different sculpts on the little prongs that fit into the hole, and it's hard to tell them apart. But, you know, we struggle on, and we do eventually get it correct, so all's well that ends well. So now with the super glue well and dried, I move on to priming the model. So for primer, I actually just use Army Painter Matte White. It's the airbrush variety. I, however, brush it on using just a dry brush. I don't own an airbrush yet. I probably will eventually expand into it, but since I'm still pretty new to the hobby, it's never bothered me. So I just use my dry palette, squirt out some of this matte white, which really does the trick, and it dries really fast, so I don't have to worry about using like the spray can primers that I then have to let it sit for, you know, 24 hours before I can really work with it. I can just dry brush on this primer, I use a dry brush to apply the primer, and then get started painting within, you know, a couple of minutes. So as you can see, I've got my really ratty makeup brush that I've been using just for dry brushing, mostly priming at this point, and I just kind of run it over the model. I believe that I had some water on it this time from washing, so wound up with some runniness, but it really didn't matter too much. Not a big deal at all. So for painting the R5, I used all of the colors that were the main colors in my Rebel Army. So that's, they're all Army Painter, Monster Brown, Oak Brown, Skeleton Bone, Army Green, and Necrotic Flesh. And I'm going to be going through and making a camo pattern on the R5. So before I started doing the camo pattern, I decided to put a layer of Sand Golem Army Painter Speed Paint on, so that if I did happen to miss a spot, it would not be blaringly obvious. It was mostly kind of like a base coat, and this way I wouldn't have to work the colors so deeply into the crevices, and I could still leave some gaps and have the dark contrast underneath um, without worrying about just, straight white showing through. With the speed paint dry, I just started going through and blocking out somewhat organic shaped sections in the various colors. I didn't do this with any kind of pattern in mind. I would just pick a spot, put some of one color on, wipe my brush off, and so on and so forth. And I would just work my way around the model. I did my best not to put too much of one color over any of the other colors. Um, and I think it turned out pretty well in the end. So after many minutes of blocking out this pattern, this is what the R5 looked like, and at this point I was pretty happy with it, and I had decided that I was going to just probably leave it here, but with a few more details picked out in colors that would stand out a little bit and make it look more like a droid than it did currently. But as for the camo, it looked really good. So for additional details, I used pure red from Army Painter just to pick out the three little, I'm not sure, are they sensor ports or whatever they are, but just to pick out the three little dots on his head. He also has two spots that I like to imagine are little brake lights on his backside that I painted with this color. And then as a finishing touch, I mixed the necrotic flesh into shining silver, that's Army Painter Metallics, and made this sort of washed out metallic pale green that I used on the antenna and the two little folded arms on his front. And then because that greenish silver was so much brighter than everything else, I did hit it with the dark tone quick shade wash just to dull it down and bring it in line with the rest of the model. Unfortunately, I did most of that painting off camera because I wasn't paying attention when I was streaming it. And this is what the final R5 wound up looking like. I was really pretty happy with it. I think it could possibly do maybe with a dark wash, like a dark brown wash, just to sort of settle into the crevices and bring out a little bit more detail. But at this point, I decided to leave it as it was. There was just kind of a lot going on with the pattern, so I didn't want to try and pick out anything else. He's pretty cute. Cute little R5. Battle ready. Thanks for watching, everyone.